So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Insignia's first webinar of 2017. Today, we're talking about crisis communication, 7 rules for reputation protection. And we have a guest for our webinar today, Guy Esnouf, who is the Director of External Communications at npower. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Hemus. I'm the Managing Director of Insignia. And again, if you're not currently working with Insignia or don't know us, we are a crisis management consultancy. We help organisations to plan, train, exercise, and sometimes handle the worst day of their corporate lives, helping people to do and say the right thing under intense pressure during a crisis. In the last couple of months of last year, 2016, we were participating in a conference, and we had a stand at the conference where we were talking to people about the crisis management advice and services that we offer. And it was fairly quiet in the morning, but then in the afternoon it started to speed up. And as I asked people why they were particularly coming to see us in the afternoon when it had been fairly quiet in the morning, they said, well, we went to a presentation by this chap called Guy Esnouf, and he scared the living daylights out of us, and so we think that we might need your services. So I was enormously grateful to Guy for helping us with our sales and marketing, but more importantly, thought that he would
with no fee, by the way.
Shush, Guy, please.
Oh, sorry, that's later.
But more importantly, thought that Guy would therefore be the perfect person to share his expertise and experience with you during the course of one of our webinars. Guy has been in the front line of crisis management at a very senior level for many years now, and I think has some really interesting insights and also some very pragmatic advice on how to succeed in managing a situation under that level of pressure. So I'm going to ask Guy maybe to explain a little bit more about his background. Then I'll hand over to Guy to walk you through his insights, advice and experience. As always, we will allow at least 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. If you do have questions as Guy talks, please post them via the chat or question frame within your control panel. We will deal with all of those questions at the end of the presentation. So please do send those through as you hear something that piques your interest or that you would like to check with Guy. So, Guy, if you could just tell us a little bit more about your background and experience, and then straight into the presentation.
Yes, certainly. Many thanks, Jonathan, and welcome everybody this afternoon. I said my name's Guy Esnouf. I'm Communications Director for npower and all of RWE and Energy's parent companies' activities in the UK. So I'm involved in energy. Last January, The Independent did a list of the 5 most difficult PR jobs for 2016, and VW beat me. So theirs were described as worse, and mine as second worst, largely because of problems we've had with customers. Almost straight after that, a month after that, if you may remember, a power station collapsed at Didcot while it was being demolished, and 4 people died. That, of course, was one of mine. I started my career in politics, then went to work in the pharmaceutical industry in the UK and then in the US. Moved across to IT, worked for a company called Unisys, and I'll mention one of their issues. Then for a small software company in Redmond, just outside Seattle in Washington. You may have heard of them, they were called Microsoft. Before coming back to the UK and working for 2 energy companies, which is where I am now. And Jonathan talked about the worst day in people's lives.
Guy?
Yes.
With apologies for interrupting so early, we're having a couple of bits of feedback saying that it's not entirely clear, your connection. I think people are hearing you, but it's not a perfect connection. I don't know if there's anything you can do about that immediately, or whether it may even be worth you logging off and logging back on again.
Okay. It's showing the reception's showing, and I'm on a wired connection, so it's showing well here. Is it better now? I just wondered if I was leaning back. I was close to the microphone, but is it a volume issue or a clarity issue?
It's ever so slightly boomy, but for me it's okay. Let's continue, and if people are finding it hard to hear, if you can send a message via the chat screen. If it isn't working, then we'll maybe ask Guy to phone in instead. So sorry to interrupt, Guy, but yeah, if you can continue maybe in the posture that you're in now, and people let me know if it's becoming very hard to hear.
And I've just turned the volume down a bit, which might help on boominess. I'm in a very small room where it's echoing like mad. So is that okay now?
I think that is better. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stay like this. Please, 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 people do send a text. There's no point in me prattling on to myself for the next half hour or so. So, background in politics, pharmaceuticals, IT, in the US and the UK, substantial activities. I used to live in Africa and work in the Middle East. I've done issue management in most countries that the UN recognizes, and for the last 2 years I've been a comms advisor to the Ministry of Defense. So if that's the background, I've had several worst days in my life, I think, by Jonathan's definition. If you go to the next slide, Jonathan, if you could.
Certainly.
What's clear is that bad stuff happens. Let me talk about one of those examples. On the 11th of June, 1994, a girl called Emily Tanet, who lives near Rouen in Normandy in France, died. She died from cyanide poisoning. On the 16th of June, at roughly 8 o'clock in the morning, maybe 7 o'clock in the morning, in Pennsylvania, where I was then living, we were contacted by the police in Normandy to say the cyanide this girl had died from was in one of our products. I was working for a pharmaceutical company. It was an antibiotic. So what we knew is that a child had taken our antibiotic and died, and she died very quickly of cyanide poisoning. We now had to start, and you can imagine that does rank up there with one of the worst days. We had to start and go through a classic understanding of what has happened, then to understand what we should do next. So the first thing is, was this us? Was this cyanide? Did it come from my company? Now, that may sound silly, other than the fact that cyanide is used, I don't know if there's anyone from the pharmaceutical industry, but it's used to test for bacterial contamination. And 2 meters away from the plant, from the production line where this drug was made, was some cyanide. The police wouldn't let us test whether it was our cyanide or not. I don't know why, you'd have to ask them, but they wouldn't. The factory where this was being made was just about to start a strike because it was being shut down. So we got together, we got a small crisis team together of 5 people, so the chairman, the chief exec, the CFO, the chief lawyer, general counsel, and myself. And that's often the constellation of people who look at these sorts of issues. Marketing may or may not be involved, in this case, no. And we said to ourselves, can we prove that it wasn't us? And the answer was no, we couldn't. Therefore, we had to assume it was and withdraw the product. If you want to withdraw a product, and this antibiotic was taken twice a day, we've now got to withdraw it by the time the evening dose is taken. So it's taken between 6 and 8 a.m. in the morning and 6 and 8 a.m. in the evening. It's now about 2 p.m. Paris time. So we have got 4 hours to make a decision and to implement it. We decided we had to withdraw, and the only way to do that was to go on radio and television and say, do not take this product. So we then informed the French government, because you really should inform governments when you're going to do something that high profile, and they said, no. You cannot tell people there might be cyanide in your drug. That was a complete surprise to us, and it's one of those things that then totally disrupted the normal functioning of any crisis team. It was completely left field, complete surprise to us, and it paralyzed our processes. It took us some time for any sort of order to be re-established, because the people in France said, the government have said no, so the answer is no. And the people in Pennsylvania in head office were saying, if you say the answer is no, you will be fired this afternoon, and we'll do it from here, which would have been awful had we done that. So we then forced the French company to withdraw the product. They prepared a statement, which obviously was in French, but my French is fine to read through that. Read through it, I said yes, send that out. And what I didn't do was take care of one of the details. We had an emergency system, emergency 1-800 number in the US, 0800 number in France, that you could ring, that could scale up to a huge number of calls. We didn't use it. We used the normal office number. Within an hour of going on television, we had, or we tried to have, over 250,000 phone calls. What we did was blow the whole phone system for the southern Paris. We couldn't communicate to the US, we couldn't communicate to our office, the factory couldn't communicate to anybody. It was chaos. What we caused was panic. And the French government said, you will cause panic if you do this. And I remember on the phone to them saying, yes, and my choice is panic or death, and I choose panic every time. Now, the truth was it wasn't anything to do with us. It was a love triangle between 2 men and a woman. And one of the men, the husband of the woman involved, had the same illness that the child had. And the girl, Emily, was just real bad luck that she was there. But this is a microcosm of an acute crisis and some of the dislocation and disruption that happens during it. Another one, on the other side of the screen, I've got bad blood. If you put to the next slide, please, Jonathan. That relates to HIV contamination of blood products, which was something that I was involved in too, or my company was involved in too. We bought the company after it had done that. So one of the other worst days in my life was the chief executive and the general counsel, the chief lawyer, coming into my office and saying, we thought you should know we're being sued by 6,000 people for giving them HIV. And the problem is, it's true. That was then 3 years of my life while we managed that. We had to manage it in ways that I think have taught me an awful lot about what I do, what we should do. It changed the definition of what the company was. It defined us for a period of time. In the end, it was managed incredibly successfully. We settled with the people who had been contaminated for $165 million. If you divide that by 6,000, that is, for a company point of view, not a bad result. But more importantly, we managed to get the people who had been affected, for them to get help, for the money to be spent with them and not paying back their insurance companies. In the US, it's an insurance-based healthcare system. And we got closure with the companies, with the individuals involved. But it was 3 years. So Josacine, the antibiotic, was an acute crisis. Hemophilia, that was a 3-year business-defining crisis. But there are, so next slide, please, Jonathan. Quite a few things I think I was able to learn from that. This is a a summary. I could have had twice as many points, but then it wouldn't have been a summary. And it's a combination of, you know, sort of philosophic things and real detailed stuff. Because often it's the detail that matters. It's like not checking the phone number. Fundamental issue. Fundamental issue in not checking the phone number that we were that we'd put on the press release. So that's a list. If we can go through that one by one. I've been involved in many other issues with Unisys, IT company. We were accused of defrauding the US government for $3 billion. Our stock price halved on the day we were about to announce a partnership with a major Japanese company. That was an entertaining day too. I worked with Microsoft on issues with the European community, with E.ON, really combating Greenpeace and just about every other charity in the UK, as far as I can tell. And with npower on the DIDCARD issue and on a lot of customer service issues. So let's go through these things one by one, if we may. So next slide, lovely. So be in the room. It's absolutely critical that when a crisis happens, we, as the senior communications people, are there in the room where decisions are being made. Murphy's Law will say you will be somewhere else. When there was the issue in France, I was in the US. I spent 1 week and 3 in France. It could easily have been there. I was 6,000 miles away. And I considered jumping on a plane and flying there. But of course, that meant I'd been out of contact all the time this scenario developed. So you need someone in the room. The fact there was no one in the room who I trusted made that the problem with the wrong phone number happen. When a crisis happens, there will be a very small number of people involved. And I'll talk about that again in a bit. It has to be one of us. When the DIDCARD accident happened last year, so I just having a drink, it was vital that communications was there during that incredibly difficult emotional time. So the first one is be in the room. It creates comradeship. It gives you authority. It makes sure that you can be involved in those difficult discussions, and the management of the company, the management of your organization cannot ignore you. Sometimes I know communications can feel that what we do won't be heard. This is a way to avoid that. During the Josephine incident, the antibiotic incident in France, when we talked about the withdrawal, the CFO said that will cost us $27 million. I was in a position to say, we don't care. And then jumping on that, the chairman could say, shut up, this isn't a financial decision. It's a reputation decision. We are the reputation guardians. There'll be other people who play the financial card. We need to understand that. The legal one, we need to understand that. But we must be in the room. Next slide, Jonathan. And one of the reasons we need to be in the room is we have anything that we produce. Our currency is advice internally and words externally. We have to produce documents, we have to produce statements. Those need to be improved. I wonder if we could do a hand, if sitting there, wherever you are, if you could think, are you happy with the approval times in your organization? I doubt that anybody is putting their hand up saying, yes, I'm really happy with this. So it's a very important thing to get right. I've seen numerous occasions when it's just not been possible for things to get done purely because of time. When the US Army went into Iraq in the first Iraq War, their slogan was speed kills. Usually that's a road safety activity, to slow down because otherwise you'll kill people. Speed kills communications activities in a crisis. And the most normal place in my experience that arise is you can't get an approval. So get your approval routes sorted out before you need to make a statement. You can't really wait until afterwards. And that often means you need to talk to the authorities. Authorities can act in unpredictable ways, as the French government did over the cyanide issue. They can really be unpredictable. Get to know them, talk to them. That's a real investment. So if you work out, you're sitting there now, who are the most likely authorities involved? One organization I worked with had a number of planes and helicopters that it flew. So I got to know someone in the Air Transportation Authority, it was in the US, just in case a plane went down, to understand, for example, in the UK, if there's a plane crash or a helicopter crash, you can't make a statement until the CAA has approved it. Who knew? Well, through getting to know people, I did. And the most important person to get to know is the chief executive, the most senior person in your organization, because they will often have to be the paralysis blocker. Making a statement, as we know, in a crisis is hard. It's easier to do nothing. Easier to do nothing, but much more important that we take the initiative. So get the approval routes sorted. Next one, if we could, Jonathan. And this, what are the objectives? I know it's a very standard thing to say, but when a crisis happens, there are a myriad of choices, just like that poor little red person is experiencing there. Generally, it's true that when you know what you're doing, it's easy to know what you should do. I've sat in crisis rooms in different countries, in different companies, where there has been this paralysis because it wasn't clear exactly what we wanted to do. Usually, communications isn't top of the list of the advice sources that the chief people in your organization will be listening to. Usually, it's other business executives. The CFO is usually more important than the chief communications officer, but not in a crisis. And there is a responsibility and opportunity that we have to lead. I remember sitting in the room in Pennsylvania. It was a hot summer's day. There was one development that happened in it, and the chief exec and general counsel were in another part of the building. And I called them up and said, you need to get on the phone now. And I watched them run across the car park and felt guilty, because this was a communications person dictating how the senior people in the company behaved. But that is our role. So we need to know what we're trying to do. If there's nothing else that we do, if that's the most important of the roles, is get those objectives clear in your own mind. There will always be conflicts, but just try and work out where it is. On Josephine, I talked about the CFO saying it will cost 27 million. On haemophilia, the initial concern was don't admit you were guilty. But that's not the point. The point in both of them is this a company that can be trusted? Is this a company that will act in the interest of customers? Because without that confidence, you don't have any customers. Next slide, please.
Guy, I'm going to break my own rule here and ask you a quick question about this slide. What does a good objective or objectives look like in a crisis? What should people be seeking to get to in terms of feeling that they have ticked this particular box?
Thank you. I think it's to understand how the dominoes work. Now, if you've got a lot of dominoes lined up, which is the most important one? It's the first one. So does, for example, is it the financial domino, the confidence to the market, I was going to say Wall Street, shows my US background, the confidence to the city that matters? Is it confidence to customers that matters? Is it confidence to employees that matters? Is it the regulator that matters? I was once in a room and we had an issue of 3 potential investigations from the Security and Exchange Commission, so the New York Stock Exchange, from the FBI, never good to be investigated by them, or by the FDA, the US health regulator. what we said there was because once one investigator went forward, the others would back off. I'd rather be investigated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, because they can't put you in prison. So the objective was to make this look like a health issue, not a financial issue or a criminal one. If that makes sense, that was the key thing. It's often the other way around. It's which one do I have to pay attention to first? And then that will then set a domino, a chain reaction up. So I hope that's answering the question. Happy to come back to that later.
Perfect, thank you.
So what drives the story? A crisis is the usual context exaggerated. So think about the context of your organization. I work for an energy company, and the golden rule is that you're innocent until proved to be an energy company, and then you're guilty by default. Whatever we do must be wrong. And that's the context that any crisis will feed into. When Didcot collapsed, the question that the journalist asked me was not how many people are dead. They asked, will the lights go off? And that's what drove the story. And I went to the site, followed my own rules. I was there immediately. I went to the part of the site that was still running, hold my mobile phone up and said, what do you hear? Well, I hear a whirring noise. Yes, that's the power station still working. So that was what drove the story. It was, will the lights go off? And it's emotion more than facts. We are horribly driven by facts, wonderfully driven by facts. Yes, of course, we need to have real basis. But I don't think it's just the British who find the emotion uncomfortable. So we need to know what drives the story, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Next slide, if we could. So then, you can't do everything. You just cannot do everything. I tried, believe me, you can't. During the Josephine issue, the antibiotic issue, we went through a pretty horrendous day, as you can imagine. How bad it was shown about a month or so later when I visited a friend in Normandy who I used to work with in the UK. And when I sat down to dinner, we toasted each other a glass of wine and said, I must say first, you gave me the worst day of my life. Which was a little bit surprising because I thought he was a friend. He said, when he got home from work that evening, when he parked his car, his children's nanny, he ran Glaxo's other company's operations in France, came running up the driveway screaming, I've killed your children, I've killed your children. Because she had not heard the television and had given them the antibiotic. Just think what you would think if someone, a babysitter, was saying, I've killed your children. I mean, it was awful. That was what we had done. We created that panic, but we prevented any further death. That evening, I got home fairly late, got myself something to eat, sitting down in front of the television to try and unwind a bit, and my mobile went. And it was the chief lawyer and said, I thought you should know we've just had a report of cyanide in one of our drugs in Japan. Now think about the geography of that. France, 6 hours one way, Japan, 9 hours the other way. I then started day 2 of that day. Have we got the same problem in Japan? Because if we did, that is then an attack on the company, and it's probably aimed at the share price. So previously, this was about confidence of a customer. Now suddenly the objective looked like this is a coordinated worldwide attack on the share price of my company, as well as on customers. Now it turned out it wasn't that, but that's what it looked like. What this taught me is I can't control that. So I should focus on what matters. So the first thing is not everything matters. And that includes a lot of what's said by journalists. Let me say that again. A lot of what's said by journalists just doesn't matter. What matters is what defines the meaning of the crisis that you're in. What does this crisis mean? What did the Josephine crisis mean? It meant, would we put financial cost in the way of potential customer safety? Were we a company who customers could trust? HIV, did it mean for years we had acted unsafely? Is that really what the story meant? And so anything that got down to those key issues was the intersection of what I can control and what matters. And that's what I should focus on. There was a lot of pointless speculation. And for me, my French is okay, but not great. And it was just tiring reading article after article and listening to broadcast after broadcast. What I needed to do was to focus on, when it came down to it, we did the right thing. That's what I had to focus on. As it turned out, we really did get the credit for that. We reintroduced the Josephine product a long time, 18 months later, and before too long, sales had massively increased over the original base. And when you asked doctors and customers, they said, this is a company we can trust. So we won on that one. Sorry, next slide. And this is again about emotion. Understand the emotion as well as the facts. Does your company, does your organization do emotion well? And that's very hard. During the DIDCOT activity, I stood up in front of a company meeting, management meeting, to talk about what was happening. And while I was there talking, I suddenly got overwhelmed by the feeling that the day before I'd been in a room where 50 people had to be told that their friends and colleagues were dead. And I just got overwhelmed by the emotion of it. And the room, the atmosphere in the room changed. Here's one of the senior people in the company standing up and crying. Quite happy to admit that. And my chief exec, who I report to, came up later and said, thank you, because that shows us what this is really about. It's about safety. It's about people's lives. And that was really quite important in the company and to the people there to realize actually that's what it's about. But organizations don't tend to do that well. It's emotions like safety, like trust, like cheating, like fraud, like lying. Those are the things that will drive the story and will get the people like the one on that screen mad with us. And you'll know what they are related to your business. And if you don't, ask yourself, what are those emotions that are there normally that might then drive things in a crisis? Last slide, Jonathan, if you could.
Just to forewarn people, we're heading into the last 10 minutes of Guy's slides. So if you do have questions, please send them through, and in about 10 minutes' time, we will start dealing with them. So on to the next slide.
Measure, but know the limits of measurement. This relates to the earlier one about not everything matters. I have regular measurement of how we do, how we perform, but what I don't need is measurement as a comfort blanket. During a crisis, you have to take decisions without enough data. You have to. And if you are paralyzed by that, you're not going to be very good at leading communications in a crisis. Now, what sort of data is enormously useful? Opinion polling, which I have done. So as soon as a crisis happened, as soon as we knew about the issue in France, while the process was going on, I got a quick opinion poll done that afternoon to give me a baseline. I then measured every month for the next 20-odd months because I needed to know where we were. That's a little bit crude, but it was essential in what we did. We had an issue one time with a climate camp, so 2,000 people protesting outside one of E.ON's power stations. And it was all over the press. It was a Saturday afternoon, and so just after the sports results on BBC, they went straight over to live pictures of a huge demonstration outside our power plant. And to us, this was awful. This just showed that our reputation was trashed forever. So we did an opinion poll the next day, quick one. And what that showed was that 21% of people had remembered there being a demonstration. So in other words, 79% had either turned off after the football scores or were just doing things like shopping or gardening or whatever else. So the thing that was a crisis to me, only 25% of people were aware of. And then when we asked which company it was that was involved in this demonstration, 29% of the people, so 29% of the 21%, confidently said it was British Gas that had the problem. And 26% said it was EDF who had the problem. And 25% got it right and said it was E.ON. So A, I have a problem, and my competitors are getting more reputation damage than I am, which will be very frustrating for them, and that only a quarter of 21% had realized it was me. That's when measurement is vital. I couldn't take decisions based on that, but it's knowing now, so when other things have happened, and that is likely to be the case, has really meant that I've been able to take decisions before we get all the data. You can't be paralyzed by needing data. You have to act and then measure how well you did. Crisis management, I think it's the last slide, isn't it, Jonathan? Yeah, oh, good. Okay, so if we can just sum that up. First, get there fast. So we need to know where there is likely to be. And think about the most likely issues, 5 or 10 for your business. Where is there most likely to be? For me, it's Swindon, Sunderland, or Dusseldorf. And I'm currently in Solihull, so it's nowhere near all of those. So what do? Be in the room and get to know the people who are most likely to be in the room. And I mean get to know them. Get to a place where they will trust you and rely on you. Don't be excluded. Get approval routes sorted out. So prepare for the top most likely ones. I've added a couple more on things on here just for the summary. Get to know, prepare for the top most likely. Establish the objectives. So you need to know the situation today. What is the background? To know if you work for a large energy company, you're probably disliked and your trust in the bank is pretty low. If you work for Apple, your trust is pretty high. Know what will drive the story, the emotions versus the facts. Know and share those emotions around your company. So I said to, in one organization, I said to the chief exec, the point is, we're seen as if we're Wonga. He said, oh, don't say that, that's not fair. I said, it isn't fair, but it's true. Understand that's where we come from. Control what you can, because few plans survive the first week, but you need to be able to adapt as you measure according to what matters. Measure, know the limits of measuring. But if you don't measure before, it's really hard to measure during. Those first few hours, often when you know something and the world doesn't, get a pulse of that quickly. That's the biggest single external action you can take before making a statement. Have a sounding board, some additional ones. I found it very useful to have someone, for example, like Jonathan, who I could talk to. There was a guy called Mike Pascal during the haemophilia activities. He would ring me when I left work. I was sure he had a tracking device whenever my car started, because almost certainly within 10 minutes or so, he'd give me a call. And he'd ask me questions like, how did it go today? Or, are those the battles we need to fight? Or, are we really getting the point across? Which is really annoying, because it was really accurate. And it was vital to do that. Had I had that during the justice inactivity, would have prevented the issue of busting half of Paris phones. But oh well. And then sleep, have a backup. I know who my backups will be now. You can't carry on forever. All of us get tired, and tired people create bad decisions. So that's added a couple on. I don't want the presentation to be too long today. That's all from me, and so over to any questions from you.
Guy, thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful, and it's always so powerful hearing it from personal experience rather than reading about it from textbooks. So, Guy, you won't be surprised to hear that we do have 5 questions already. We've got just over 15 minutes, so we should get through the 5. If there are others, please send them in quickly. So we've got an old chestnut here that we get asked frequently. So here we go then, guys. So interested in thoughts on how to manage relationships, particularly with legal colleagues who see things in a more binary way and are naturally cautious in allowing spokespeople to speak about emotions rather than just facts.
Yeah. Let me give the example of the haemophilia activity. So we've been accused of giving HIV to 6,000 people, and it's true. But because of something called the development risk defense, it's not our fault. And the first draft of the press response drafted by the lawyers, interesting why they should feel the right to do that, another matter, was these allegations have no merit. Now, what does that say in English? That says we don't respect your right to call, to ask. It says sort of. It says something else, probably in a different term, but that's what it says. I went through that to say, no, absolutely not. The statement we got to was this was a tragedy nobody could have predicted or prevented. If there's anything we could do now or could have done then to prevent it, we would have done. But the sad truth is that there isn't. Now that doesn't admit liability, but it does give approachability and human warmth. Going back to what's the context? The context is you're a large company that doesn't care. We need to prevent that. What I then said to the lawyers was, listen, if this comes to a jury, will the jury have already convicted us before they walk in the room? Will the news coverage have been so bad that they'll be sure that we're guilty before they ever become jurors? And that's talking legal language. And they, to their enormous credit, they said, so how do we stop that? And I said, what we do is we seem approachable. We make sure we're approachable and human. And the way I talked to the board was to say, it's like you were driving to work down the motorway, and you're in the passenger seat. You're not distracting the driver, but you're in the passenger seat. And someone runs out in front, a young girl runs out in front. The driver hits her and she's killed. How do you feel? You feel awful. You would express that feeling of, oh my God, this is awful. This is a huge tragedy. But you're not liable. You're not liable. And that's the difference there. How to be able to say, express humanity without admitting liability. And there are ways around that, such as, this was a tragedy. Yes. So that's really how I've sought to do it, by getting them to understand that if there's a jury involved, you must make sure the jury doesn't have its mind made up. And secondly, you can reduce the likelihood of lawsuits if you are seen to be acting responsibly. So I think those are the 2 key things. Rather long answer, sorry.
Thank you, Guy. And in a way, an interrelated one, because it relates back to colleagues and having colleagues on board, I guess, and working effectively with them. The question is, how do you get senior management attention on crisis management ahead of a crisis happening?
The head of, when it happens, usually you've got their attention. Yeah. Not always. I, in a number of companies, have done A, exercises, B, scenario assessments that have looked at what are the most likely things. So, for example, on Justicine, the antibiotic poisoning, I'd worked with our insurers about 6 months before, to do a workshop on cyanide poisoning, one of our products, were identified as the biggest single risk. Because we'd done that, the senior management were aware. So that was an advanced planning is enormously helpful. It isn't perfect, but it's enormously helpful. And then it's real, quiet, confidential discussions. So, for example, chief executive, chairs care about the reputation of the organization. It's no good often talking with the CFO about long-term reputation, but the most senior figure usually has a responsibility for the long-term reputation, and so you need to find a way to engage them with that and then let it trickle down. So you get to the point where the chairman said, shut up to the CFO, it's not about the money. So preparation and engagement. It's not easy, but it's essential.
Thank you. And again, an interrelated question. How often should companies rehearse their response to a crisis?
It depends on the likelihood of a crisis and how many different ones there are. So I've just finished a training session with a new division we're about to launch. The main issue for there is hacking and the loss of customer data. We will do that fairly often. We did one last year. This is just getting ready to do another. And the reason for that is it's a very fast-moving field. As the Democrats have recently discovered, it's a really fast-moving field, and it's very possible for different sorts of issues to develop. When I worked in a pharmaceutical company, we had a top 10 list, and there some of those we went through, as with cyanide poisoning, once every 5 years or so, because it's the same issues. Some we reviewed every year. So look at your risk assessment, work out how big those risks and how hairy they are, and then how often they change.
Great, thank you. Next one. Given Guy's comments about reading all of the coverage on the cyanide issue, does he believe that communications directors should read all of the coverage of a crisis to understand the angle the story is taking?
You need to make sure you have an accurate picture. My comment about having a sounding board, during haemophilia, there's a guy called Mike who read it for me. It sounds as if I'm avoiding responsibility. No. My first job there is to give good, consistent advice, but advice that changes as the needs do. I can't be stuck in an office or behind a desk reading all the time. I need to find some way of getting the relevant information to me. So that's a great thing, having other people you can trust. I look at my press cuttings. It's the first thing I look at in the morning. Every single morning, that's the discipline. But I'm scanning to see if there's any particular of concern or opportunity during the day. You will be looked to as the advisor of your company, of your chief exec. I'm talking in a company context, that there's lots of chair or etc. They will interrogate you strongly, and if you don't know your facts, you're screwed, basically. So you need to know enough to get the information. If you can get someone else to do it who you really trust, even better. But I would never want to be able to go into a board meeting without knowing the facts.
Thank you. We've got 2 more questions lined up and about 8 minutes to go. So if there are any 1 or 2 final questions, we may just about have time for them. Next question, which I think you've partially covered in the answer to my earlier question. What tend to be the key objectives in a crisis? What are the objectives that you are most often focusing on?
Trust. So do the right people trust you? So do your employees trust you? Well, I used to do investor relations and then switched to internal comms. And I used to think, well, that's going to be easy because the analysts are smart. And very soon I realised that our employees know where the bodies are buried, because they bury them. It's very simple. So, firstly, your employees. You cannot run a business without the confidence of your employees. Secondly, customers. You know, the adage, look after your customers and everything else will take care of itself. If your customers, particularly in something where there is a risk like pharmaceuticals, do not believe that you are looking after their interests, forget it. I mean, I've had a conversation with someone saying how much we spend on marketing. If we're a well-trusted company above the average, that magnifies the impact of our marketing spend. If we're trusted below the average, it diminishes the impact of our marketing spend. And that's true on all other aspects too. So first, your employees, or you can get nothing done, and you'll get leaks. People will leak things. I've seen that before. Second, your customers, and third, shareholders. What I think is wrong is just to focus on the shareholder. That's often what the chief executive will look at first. We have to let them know it's the other things that drive value. Shareholders don't drive value. Shareholders reflect value. So that will be my usual priority order.
Excellent, thank you. Final question that we have is, within a large organisation, who should own crisis management?
Not communications. We should be the advisors. I don't want to be running it. Again, it depends on your risk profile. In pharmaceutical companies, you would have someone responsible for going to prison. Sorry, for a director of risk, vice president of risk, whatever. And that's an important thing. So risk or security, business continuity will usually run the management of it. I've been asked to do that role and I've resoundingly said no. What we should do is to have the right input into it. We are the reputation outside in, eyes of the world, eyes of the conscience, of the organization's conscience, input to that. So it should be someone else. I don't want to be bogged down in the detail of organising meetings and keeping minutes, etc., etc., etc. So it should be clear who is, and if it isn't clear, that's an enormous problem. But I would say, please, unless there's really exceptional reasons, don't take the responsibility yourself.
Thanks, Guy. That's also good advice. So we are now drawing into the last few minutes of this session. So summary from me and kind of what follows on from this. The first thing, again, is to say, Guy, thank you so much for giving of your time, of your experience, of your expertise. There is no substitute for experience in a crisis, and it's very nice to be able to borrow from someone else's experience. So thank you for your time, thank you for your candour, and thank you for your wisdom. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody else on this webinar does as well. For those listening, my contact details, our contact details are there on the screen. If you have any questions about what you've heard, please field them through me. If it's something for Guy in particular, then I will certainly pass that message on. And Guy, I'm sure if you have time and are able to, you would be happy to respond. Is that?
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. And can I just say one other thing, just to make sure I bring it out? During the cyanide issue, the fact that we had done a rehearsal of that was immeasurably beneficial. I can't overstate how important that was. So it just meant I knew what the hell was going on. So rehearsals matter. You know, I didn't just turn up today and do this presentation. I've thought about what I wanted to say sometime, but yet we sometimes treat crises without any proper preparation, and that's criminal.
So in terms of what next, first of all, I can again confirm that I haven't paid Guy anything to say what he has said, but if anyone is interested in rehearsals, crisis management, planning, training, exercising, then please use those same contact details on this slide. What we will be sending you in any case over the next few days is a link to a recording of this session if you'd like to share that with colleagues or listen again to Guy's insights. There will be a written report of this session sent to you next week. And we will be running the next in our series of webinars in March, and we'll be sending invitations for that session out in the second half of February. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I trust you found this of value and interest. Guy, thank you again. And as always, I wish everybody a crisis-free afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much.